At 11:12 a.m. Moscow time on New Year's Eve, UAV activity coincided with grid instability, straining a key power substation.
December 31st, 11:12 a.m. Moscow time. The city is already moving in its familiar New Year rhythm. Decorative lights are active across major districts, commercial centers are filling up ahead of evening celebrations, and energy demand is climbing steadily toward its daily peak. From the outside, nothing looks unusual, but major infrastructure failures rarely announce themselves with noise. They begin quietly, inside control rooms and monitoring screens. The first irregularities appear as brief voltage fluctuations. One sector reports a short dip, another logs an automatic correction, and then a third flags instability that cannot be explained by routine load variation. On their own, each alert would be dismissed as a technical hiccup. Taken together, they form a pattern that operators immediately recognize as intentional interference rather than coincidence. At the same time, the air defense picture begins to feel uncomfortable. Radar screens do not light up with a dramatic wave of fast-moving threats. Instead, small, low-signature aerial objects appear intermittently, fading in and out of detection zones. They are not impressive targets. They are slow, cheap, and unremarkable by military standards. But they arrive with timing precise enough to force attention and consume decision-making bandwidth. This is the advantage of conventional UAVs. They do not overwhelm defenses through speed or altitude. They overwhelm them by forcing constant verification. Each contact must be checked, classified, tracked, and prioritized. Every second spent doing that is a second not spent protecting what actually matters. Russian air defense units respond exactly as trained. Panzer S-1 systems shift into heightened alert. Tor M-2 batteries tighten engagement zones, and electronic warfare units begin active jamming to disrupt navigation and control links. The response is disciplined and procedural, because at this stage the goal is containment, not escalation. But the real target is not in the sky. It is on the ground, inside a critical electrical substation that links multiple distribution branches. This facility. On New Year's Eve, that moment is particularly sensitive. Demand is high, reserve margins are thinner, and maintenance crews are already stretched by holiday schedules. When a substation enters protective mode, the grid responds by isolating sections automatically. Power is rerouted, load is shed, and stability becomes harder to maintain with every additional fluctuation. Above the city, UAV activity continues just long enough to keep air defenses engaged. Some are intercepted, others vanish from radar without confirmation. The uncertainty forces operators to treat every contact as potentially real, ensuring that attention remains divided between airspace management and infrastructure protection. Inside the electrical control centers, by 11:18 a.m., the situation crosses a threshold. The issue is no longer monitoring anomalies. It is managing an active disruption. Air defenses remain engaged overhead, but the decisive battleground has shifted below. The question is no longer whether UAVs can be intercepted. It is whether Moscow's power infrastructure can absorb coordinated stress at the worst possible time of the year. And this is only the opening phase, because once a grid begins protecting itself, recovery becomes a race against cascading failure, and the next decisions will determine whether this remains a controlled incident or escalates into a citywide blackout. If you want the next update delivered like a clean radar lock, subscribe and stay with the story. Outside the control rooms, the air defense posture tightens. The problem is not one dramatic target. It is the persistence of small, low-flying UAVs that keep reappearing at the edges of coverage, forcing the same question over and over. Is this a decoy, a probe, or the real strike path? Russian crews do what they are trained to do in that situation. They elevate readiness, they compress reaction time, and they expand the engagement bubble around critical sites. Panzer S-1 units move to protect key infrastructure nodes, not landmarks. Tor M-2 batteries focus on low-altitude threats where their tracking is strongest. Electronic warfare teams increase jamming intensity, trying to disrupt navigation and control links, and to break any timing coordination between incoming UAVs and the ground effects now unfolding. Here timing matters. Demand is rising toward the evening peak, and the city's distribution network is already operating with less slack than it would on a normal day. When a major node experiences repeated instability, operators must choose between two bad options. They can keep power flowing and risk equipment damage, or they can shed power and accept outages that ripple outward in unpredictable ways. At the same time, the air defense picture keeps pulling attention upward. Some UAV contacts are intercepted cleanly, creating brief moments of relief. But relief is dangerous here because it can trick decision makers into thinking the threat is fading. The radar tracks do not stop, they pulse. They arrive in uneven intervals, just enough to keep crews in a constant state of verify, classify, engage, which is exactly how fatigue begins. Then a more specific concern emerges. The UAV pattern is not distributed evenly across the city. It clusters around the same corridor that aligns with major transmission routes and high-value substations. That correlation shifts the interpretation inside Russian command. This is not random harassment. It is an attempt to force defensive assets to stay fixed while the grid absorbs repeated shocks. By mid-phase of the incident, the response becomes layered. Air defense commanders coordinate coverage so that no single battery is forced to chase every contact. Grid operators request priority protection for specific nodes that, if lost, would force disproportionate load transfers. Emergency crews are staged near key substations, not because they can fix the problem instantly, but because the first minutes after a fault determine whether it stays local or spreads. And yet the pressure does not ease. Moscow is caught in a defensive loop. Air defenses are busy denying airspace to small UAVs. Electronic warfare is actively saturating the environment, and grid controllers are performing constant rerouting to prevent collapse. Each system is functioning, but each system is also consuming the time and attention the others need. And the most dangerous truth becomes clear. The attackers do not need to win the air war. They only need to keep Moscow's defenses working at maximum pace long enough for one critical electrical node to fail at the wrong moment, because once that happens, the city does not lose power like a switch. It loses it like dominoes. By 11:38 a.m., the pattern stops looking like scattered pressure and starts looking like a timed squeeze. On the surface, it is still the same threat. Ordinary UAVs appearing low, slipping between coverage gaps, forcing air defense crews to reacquire targets that never stay where they should. But inside the grid control rooms, the readouts begin to show something worse than a hit. They show drift, not a total collapse. Not yet. A slow instability that creeps through linked lines the way heat creeps through metal. Operators can see load rising on routes that were never designed to carry it for long. They can see voltage sagging and then snapping back, like the network is breathing too hard. And the problem with a power system under stress is simple. Every correction you make buys you time, but it also moves the stress somewhere else. In the air defense chain, the same truth is forming in parallel. The UAVs are not arriving as one clean wave. They are arriving as a sequence, a few contacts, then a pause, another cluster, then a longer gap. It is just enough to keep crews from ever resetting their posture. The result is a battlefield that feels quiet for 5 seconds, then suddenly loud again, and that rhythm is how mistakes happen. Pantsir S, one crew's track low returns that flicker at the edge of clutter. Tor M, two operators keep their systems ready for targets that appear too close for comfort. Electronic warfare pushes harder, trying to disrupt navigation and timing, trying to break the incoming pattern into something random. But the pattern refuses to become random, because the aim is not to overwhelm everything at once. The aim is to force one clean moment, and that moment starts to build when the UAV tracks begin clustering around a critical corridor, the kind that ties multiple substations into a single backbone. In a city network, not all nodes are equal. Some substations can fail and stay local. Others act like hinges. If one of those hinges is forced offline while neighboring lines are already hot, the entire system can tip. Inside Russian command, the priorities shift. This is no longer defend the airspace. It becomes protect the grid nodes that prevent cascade. That sounds straightforward, but it creates a trap. When you begin guarding specific points, you reveal what you believe matters most, and you tie your own hands to static positions. Out over the approaches, the UAVs keep coming low and fast. Some are destroyed before they reach meaningful range, but a few do not die where the defenders want them to. They force late engagements, forcing crews to fire at bad angles and short timelines. The engagements themselves become stressful because the closer the intercept, the less time there is for reclassification and the greater the risk of confusion. Then the grid produces the first unmistakable warning. And at exactly the wrong time, the air picture surges again. The radar feed lights up with another set of low contacts, not dozens, but enough to stretch attention across multiple bearings. Air defense units react on instinct, acquire, track, engage. The problem is that each engagement pulls focus, and each missed second on the grid side matters more now than any single intercept. Because the grid is reaching the point where a single additional loss of load balancing capacity will create a chain reaction. Operators try to reroute power again. They shift flow to secondary paths. They attempt to keep the frequency stable. But the system is already running with reduced slack, and the city is moving closer to that narrow threshold where reroute becomes overload. That is when the tension peaks. A cluster of UAV contacts pushes toward a zone aligned with a high-value electrical node. Air defenses engage aggressively, trying to keep the fights away from the infrastructure itself. The jamming intensifies. The tracking becomes messy. The return pictures become noisy. For several seconds, it is hard to tell which contacts are still real and which are ghosting through clutter. Then the grid loses its margin. A protective trip hits not the end of everything, but the kind of trip that forces a rapid reconfiguration. In practical terms, it means power reroutes instantly, and the lines that were already running hot suddenly run hotter. Another alarm stack follows. Another automated action triggers. And now the city is not dealing with a strike, it is dealing with a cascade risk. This is the moment where everyone understands the same brutal truth. You can shoot down most of the UAVs and still lose the day if the grid is forced into self-protection at the wrong node. Air defenses may be winning the sky in visible terms, but the infrastructure is fighting a quieter battle underneath one fought in circuits, overload limits, and reaction time. The crisis has moved from tension to brink. Moscow's defenses are firing, jamming, and tracking. Grid operators are isolating faults, rerouting power, and trying to keep the system upright. But both sides can feel the same thing closing in. The next impact does not need to be spectacular. It just needs to land on the one hinge point the city cannot afford to lose. After 11:56 a.m., the air picture stays busy, but the real drama moves to the power rooms. The defense network is still firing and jamming, still trying to keep UAVs away from the most sensitive nodes, yet the grid is now operating without slack. Every reroute is a trade, and every trade heats something else. A second protective trip hits, faster than anyone wants to admit. It is not total blackout on the screen, but it forces another automatic reconfiguration. That reconfiguration pushes load onto lines that are already stressed, and suddenly, the system is balancing on timing instead of capacity. Operators can feel it in the alarms. Not one problem, but many small ones stacking into a single failure risk. Outside, the UAV pattern tightens. A few contacts slip low along the edges where coverage is worst, and air defense crews respond on instinct. Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 units take quick shots at short ranges, while electronic warfare pushes harder to break guidance and timing. Most of the incoming targets are disrupted or destroyed, but the engagement itself creates the pressure. Crews are working without a pause, rotating priorities in seconds, making calls that normally take minutes. Then, the grid takes its hardest hit of the sequence, not from a cinematic fireball, but from losing the wrong function at the wrong time. A key node drops into protection, and for a moment, the control room is watching a cascade form in slow motion. Frequency starts to wobble. Load sheds in a controlled way. The system cutting demand to save hardware, and the city's power map changes shape. Neighborhood blocks go dark first. Then larger zones flicker, stabilizing briefly, then dipping again as the network tries to hold. The lighting does not explode. It collapses in patches, like the city is being dimmed by sections. Backup systems kick in where they can, but the signal is clear. The grid is no longer operating normally. It is surviving. On the defense side, the tactics shift again. The mission becomes containment. Protect what remains online, secure repair access, and prevent a second wave from striking crews while they are exposed. That is the hidden danger of infrastructure attacks. The first disruption is only half the story. The second phase is the window where repairs become the target. Moscow's air defenses may still be standing, but the power network has been forced into emergency behavior. The city isn't defeated in the air, it has been pushed into a logistical problem that grows by the minute because every delay in restoration multiplies the strain on transport, communications, and security. And the next question is not whether the UAVs can be intercepted, it is whether the grid can be stabilized before the next shock arrives. 12 a.m. Moscow time. The strike has already done what it was designed to do. It turned a single morning into a chain of second-order problems. Air defenses can claim intercepts, and jammers can claim disruptions. But the grid does not care about claims. It only cares about what stays online and what does not. Inside the control rooms, the response becomes procedural and ruthless. Operators isolate damaged sections, reroute power where the lines will tolerate it, and shed load in controlled blocks to stop a wider cascade. Repair teams are staged, but they do not rush in blindly. They wait for clearance, for safe corridors, for confirmation that the air picture has cooled. In this kind of event, the most dangerous minute is the one where a crew truck is rolling under a sky that might still be hunting. On the Russian side, air defense units keep their posture, but priorities shift. The mission is no longer stop everything, it is protect the restoration. Tor M2 and Pantsir S1 batteries repositioned to cover critical substations and access roads, while electronic warfare keeps scanning for the next timing pulse that looks wrong. The grid is now a guarded asset, not just a civilian service. And that is the real New Year warning buried under the entire sequence. A UAV wave does not need to flatten a city to create leverage. It only needs to force emergency mode at the right nodes, at the right time, when demand, pressure, and attention are already stretched thin. The air battle fades from view, but the infrastructure battle stays. Because once the lights start flickering, the question is never who shot what. The question is how long the system can hold before the next wave finds the gaps again. If you want the next breakdown smoother than a radar track at 12 a.m., hit subscribe. Let's keep the channel's air picture locked in.